Today I'm looking at a poem that I really like. I've spoken to students who find it a little bit daunting. It's fairly long, not divided into stanzas, and some people can be a little bit put off. I think the key really is to understand what's going on in this poem before we start to read it, and also to understand that it has some long multi-clause sentences that we just need to kind of take apart a little bit. So the poem is My Last Duchess by Robert Browning, who was a major Victorian poet. He is also known for being married to Elizabeth Barrett, who became Elizabeth Barrett Browning, who is particularly known for the love poems that she wrote to him. And this poem was published in 1842. So, first of all, I'm going to talk about what's happening in this poem. We have an Italian duke. This is a real person. He was Duke Alfonso II of Ferrara, and Ferrara is a region in Italy. And this is something which happened really in history. In 1561, his young wife, Lucrezia, died in suspicious circumstances. It's thought that she was poisoned. And Browning here is kind of hinting at, suggesting that her husband had something to do with this. And he's showing us why the husband might have wanted to be responsible for her death. So in the poem, it's a dramatic monologue, which means that the husband, the Duke, is talking all the way through. And he is walking through his stately home mansion with another man. And the man he is walking with works for a count, another Italian nobleman. And the important thing that we find out at the end of this poem is that the Duke is negotiating to marry the Count's daughter. So the Count's daughter then in that case would be his next Duchess. And you can see from this that marriage in those days, there were big age differences, and it was really a business transaction between the husband-to-be and the bride-to-be's father. So what he does is he walks past a painting which is covered by a curtain, and he draws the curtain to show the man who works for the Count what's behind it. And it's a portrait of this Duchess who has died. And then he talks about the things about her that he wasn't really happy about. He says that she appreciated other people just as much as she appreciated him. She smiled and thanked other people just as much as she thanked him. And he didn't like that. He thought that he should have special smiles and special thanks. However, he didn't feel he could lower himself enough. He's too important, and also really not very good with words. He was too important to explain to her exactly what he wanted from her, so he didn't say anything at all. And then he happily goes on to talk about the next piece of art that they pass, and he also mentions the dowry that he's expecting to get from the father of his next Duchess. So I'm going to read it. It's quite long, so here we are. Okay, it's in iambic pentameter, and it's rhyming couplets, but not divided into stanzas at all. There's quite a lot of caesura, quite a lot of enjambment. If you don't know what they are and you'd like me to explain that at some point, just let me know. Okay, that's my last Duchess painted on the wall, looking as if she were alive. I call that piece a wonder now, for our Pandolf's hands worked busily a day, and there she stands. Wilt please you sit and look at her? I said Fra Pandolf by design, for never read strangers like you that pictured countenance, the depth and passion of its earnest glance, but to myself they turned, since none puts by the curtain I've drawn for you but I. and seemed as they would ask me, if they durst, how such a glance came there. So, not the first are you to turn and ask thus. Sir, 'twas not her husband's presence only called that spot of joy into the Duchess' cheek. Perhaps Frau Pandolf chanced to say, her mantle laps over my lady's wrist too much, or paint must never hope to reproduce the faint half-flush that dies along her throat. Such stuff was courtesy, she thought, and cause enough for calling up that spot of joy. She had a heart, how shall I say, too soon made glad, too easily impressed. She liked whate'er she looked on, and her looks went everywhere. So 'twas all one. My favour at her breast, the dropping of the daylight in the west, the bough of cherries some officious fool broke in the orchard for her, the white mule she rode with round the terrace, all and each would draw from her alike the approving speech, or blush at least. She thanked men, good, but thanked somehow, I know not how, as if she ranked my gift of a 900-years-old name with anybody's gift. Who'd stoop to blame this sort of trifling? Even if you had skill in speech, which I have not, to make your will quite clear to such an one and say, just this or that in you disgusts me, here you miss, or there exceed the mark, and if she let herself be lessoned so, nor plainly set her wits to yours, forsooth, and made excuse, e'en then would be some stooping, and I choose never to stoop. Oh, sir, she smiled, no doubt, whene'er I passed her, but who passed without much the same smile? This grew. I gave commands, then all smiles stopped together. There she stands as if alive. Will't please you rise? We'll meet the company below then. I repeat, the Count your master's known munificence is ample warrant that no just pretence of mine for dowry will be disallowed, though his fair daughter's self, as I avowed at starting, is my object. Nay, we'll go together down, sir. Notice Neptune, though, taming a seahorse, thought a rarity, which Claus of Innsbruck cast in bronze for me. So that's the poem. Let's run through it. I don't always do this with poems, but this one being particularly long and being really just a story, I think it's nice to clarify it. So that's my Last Duchess painted on the wall, looking as if she were alive. That tells us she's not alive now. My Last Duchess, by the end of the poem, we realise that now he's thinking about his next Duchess. Frau Pandolf was the painter, and he talks about Frau Pandolf's hands working busily a day. So the Duchess has sat in front of the painter for a day, sitting still, and it's taken him that amount of time to paint the portrait. He says he'd said on purpose, Frau Pandolf, because strangers like you, meaning the man he's talking to, never look at this picture without, if they dare, if they durst, asking me how that look came there. How come she had that expression? Pictured countenance, that's her face. And the depth and passion of its earnest glance. People are surprised when they see the picture. And in the middle of this long, complicated sentence, he says, nobody puts by the curtain I have drawn for you, but I am the only person allowed to draw this curtain. This shows us the amount of control that this man is still exerting over his wife after her death. He controls who looks at her picture. So you're not the first person to ask me this. So we infer that the man he's with has said, oh, how come she's looking like that? So he says, it wasn't just my presence, wasn't her husband's only, that called that spot of joy, a bit of a blush into her cheek. It might have been Frau Pandolf saying, her mantle laps over my lady's wrist too much, meaning your shawl, you need to move your shawl a little bit. Or paint could never possibly show this faint half flush along your throat, flattering her, saying, I can never possibly reproduce your beauty in paint. These things, courtesy, flattering, that would be enough to call up a spot of joy, to make her blush. And then he says she has a heart too soon made glad. But we notice that he is not very articulate. His speech starts to become fragmented. We see the dashes. How shall I say? She was too soon made glad, too easily made happy, too easily impressed. This is where he's starting to get to the point of what he didn't like about her. She liked whatever she looked at. And she looked at everything. Everything was the same to her. My favourite, her breast, my jewelry that I gave her. So that's one thing. The dropping of the daylight in the west, the sunset. A bough of cherries somebody broke for her from the orchard. The white mule she rode on round the terrace. They were all equal to her. My jewellery, my favour that I gave her and she wore on her breast was not special. She liked everything. And everything drew the same kind of approving speech from her, or a blush. And then he talks about thanking. She thanked everybody. Well, that's good. But she thanked somehow, I know not how. He can't really explain himself. She thanks people all the same for everything. He thinks the 900-year-old name, the very old family that she has married into, should be something that she's more grateful for than other people's gifts. So she ranked that name with anybody's gift. And he says, who would lower themselves, stoop to blame this trifling, silly stuff? And then he says all the reasons why he hasn't done that, why he didn't speak to her. He said, even if you have skill in speech, which I don't, I'm not good at articulating myself. I'm not eloquent. To say what you want to such a person who's upsetting you in this way. And if she let herself be lessened, if she allowed you to speak to her like that, and if she didn't set her wits to yours, argue with you, make excuses, even if all those things were true, it would still mean stooping, lowering yourself. Even if you were eloquent, even if she would listen and didn't argue, and even if she didn't make any excuses, it would still mean lowering yourself, and I choose never to stoop. So then he talks about smiling. He says, yes, she smiled at everybody. She smiled, but she smiled at everybody the same. So he says, then the sentences get very short. We've had these long, complex sentences with lots of clauses. And they are main clauses, so they're almost sentences. This grew. I gave commands. Then all smiles stopped together. So we're inferring that this means I gave some kind of instruction to somebody and she died as a result. And then he repeats this as if alive. There she stands as if alive. So what follows the all smiles stopping together is, oh, she looks as if she's alive. So we can read pretty easily between the lines and see what he's saying here. Then he tells the chap to stand up again because he's very arrogant, egotistical, controlling, tells people what to do. We're going to meet the people below. And then he talks about the dowry. Munificence means generosity. He's saying, your master, the Count, is known for his generosity. Therefore, I know that any reasonable request I make for a dowry will be accepted by him. He's talking about money here. And then he says, oh, but it's his daughter's fair self that I'm really interested in. But he's kind of shown his real interest here because he's talked about money first, and he's obviously talked about it before. Then they're going to go down, and then he says, oh, look at this other very interesting thing. This is Neptune taming a seahorse and Klaus of Innsbruck casting gold for me. So he's name dropping, showing something else very interesting, showing off. So I hope that clarifies what is happening. bit by bit in the poem. I think of this as a feminist poem. Browning is showing a man who is so controlling that he won't let anybody look at his dead wife's picture unless he's in charge. He is so controlling that even though she upset him, he wouldn't lower himself to say what had upset him, but arranged her death instead. Very egotistical. He says, if people dare to ask me why she looked like this. So he's quite impressed with himself for being intimidating. And this poor girl has no idea that she was supposed to give her husband extra special thanks, extra special smiles and recognition and appreciation. So in exasperation, shall we say, because he wants to control her, the only thing he can do is have her life ended and then get another wife to replace her. So there's quite a flippant tone, I think, which we get from the rhyming couplets. He seems very pleased with himself. He seems happy to tell this person he's with all of these details. And I see this as a warning, but I'm not quite sure in which way. Is it a conscious warning? Is he cleverly, maybe a little bit riskily, telling the person who works for the Count, this is what I expect of my wife, and this is what will happen to the next one if she doesn't behave how I want her to? Or is he, which I prefer this interpretation, is he just blurting all this out because he thinks so much of himself, and then it does serve as a warning, but an unconscious warning rather than a deliberate one? I'd be really interested to know what other people think, whether it's a deliberate warning or an unconscious warning that it isn't really meant. I do think that the person who works for the Count really needs to make this clear to the Count, to the girl's father, and to say, don't let your daughter marry this man. It's not worth it. And it's a very thought-provoking poem, I think, especially at the time it was written, nearly 200 years ago, that we're looking at how a man might control a woman, how he might see her as a possession, and how he might think so much of himself that he's not willing to enter into a conversation or interaction with her about what he might expect in the way of her behavior and why he's not happy about her. And of course, we would see things extremely differently today. This poem has also inspired a novel which I began to read, couldn't really get on with, by Maggie O'Farrell, who wrote Hamnet, which is very well known and has been made into a film recently. So I hope that's helpful to anybody who, for whatever reason, needs to understand this poem a bit more closely, needs to feel a little bit more confident with it, and who wants to be able to talk about it or write about it. So I'd love it if you let me know what you think. Let me know if this kind of a reading is helpful. And also, if you've got requests, then please tell me, because I'm more than happy to see what I can do with other poems to just try and clarify, throw some light on them, tell you what I like about them, if you think that's helpful. So if you've stayed with me this far, thank you so much for sticking with me. And I hope you enjoy reading poetry as you go on.